In my presentation, I will be exploring gender pay inequality. We will survey the gender pay gap from a general perspective, then in two specific countries, China and the United States. We will look at causes of the gender pay gap, how it disproportionately affects women, and what is being done to stop it. In Part 1, we will look at demographics of gender pay inequality affecting women. Gender pay inequality refers to the fact that working women tend to earn less than working men. Globally, the average woman will earn 77 cents to every dollar earned by men for each hour worked. The gaps are even higher for women of color, indigenous women, migrant women, and women with disabilities. To give some insight into how big of an issue this problem is, in the U.S., the average woman that works from age 25 until she retires at the age of 65, working a full-time, year-round occupation, will earn over $500,000 less in her lifetime than the average working man. In colonial times, women's jobs were mainly an extension of their household chores, such as making clothes, cleaning, and cooking. The roles shifted, however, when their husbands were away and off at war. Women began to run family businesses and served as nurses and cooks at war even. During the Industrial Revolution, women began to work at factories, where they braved harassment, unfair pay, as well as being deprived of their personal freedom and financial compensation. In the mid-1800s, Charlotte Woodward, a women's rights advocate, joined with other women to rally the right for women to keep their earnings. It wasn't until 1848 in New York, when the Married Women's Property Act was passed, that women got to keep the money they earned, as previously husbands acquired all of their wife's earnings. In 1860, similar laws were passed by other states. In the 1800s throughout the early 1900s, women began to work more. In 1941, World War II increased availability of jobs for women, with over 6 million women from all backgrounds working jobs such as streetcar conductors, machine operators, and railroad workers, which resulted in a rise in salaries for women, and more women committed to work. However, after the war ended in 1945, many women lost their jobs when the men returned. In 1974, Congress passes the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. This prohibited discrimination by creditors against women due to their sex or marital status. Women in the workforce continued to grow throughout the 20th century. In 1970, for instance, women earned 27% of average family income, but that number jumps to 37% in 2009. Today, women are becoming more educated, postponing childbearing and marriage, having smaller families, and focusing more on their careers. Women are presently more likely to go to college than men, which we'll see is true in both China and the United States later in the presentation. Still, gender pay inequality persists globally despite these major changes and efforts by individual, local, and governmental forces. There are many elements that influence the gender pay gap and serve as barriers to prevention. Women are disproportionately represented in service sector jobs, occupying 84% of jobs in areas such as health, retail, and social work. Men, contrastingly, are more greatly represented than women in higher paying jobs, like in construction and manufacturing industries. This is known as occupational segregation. According to the United Nations, this is one of the main reasons that the gender gap exists. The fact that women tend to be concentrated in different jobs than men, like teaching or healthcare, which tend to be underpaid professions. To that regard, work done by women is often valued less. Jobs that are feminized tend to receive a lower salary than so-called male jobs. Furthermore, there are fewer women in managerial positions. Women hold only 25% of senior leadership positions. It is also estimated that, globally, 34% of businesses have no female senior managers. Women are also still majorly responsible for household care tasks. Women undertake 75% of all unpaid care work and spend 2.5 times more time on these tasks than men do. Studies also document what is known as the motherhood penalty, meaning that mothers tend to earn less than non-mothers, and the fatherhood bonus, where fathers are not always affected by fatherhood and even earn more than mothers and other men. This is partially due to the notion that women are more likely to pause their careers to take care of children, elderly, or sick relatives, resulting in more absences from work and more likelihood to work part-time than men, meaning women will earn less. Lastly, gender discrimination is a contributing factor to the gender pay gap. Direct gender discrimination constitutes paying someone less due to their gender, whereas indirect gender discrimination is the result of an unconscious bias, a major contributor to the gender wage gap today. There are many consequences of gender pay inequality, such as poverty. Nearly 1/3 of all families maintained by women live below the poverty level. Living with less income, women may struggle to afford health care and child care too. 97% of women are worried about health care costs, while 52% of women say issues with child care negatively impacts their work performance. Additionally, there is a correlation between mood disorders among women and gender pay inequality. It was found that women paid less than men were at higher risk of depression and anxiety than women who were paid more than men. When jobs become more demanding and less rewarding, employees often feel more stressed by the end of the workday. Stress over a long period of time is able to result in depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses as well. In part 2, we will look at demographics of gender pay inequality in China and the U.S. China has a population of 1.402 billion. 64.7% of these people are employed, while 44.5% of the total labor force is female. As demonstrated by the education statistics, more women are enrolled in college than men, with 69% of women ages 18 to 22 participating in tertiary education compared to 58.9% of men. As of 2010, China had the largest workforce in the world with 0.78 billion actively working individuals. Over the last few decades, the gender pay gap has widened in China. The wage gap ratio decreased from 82% in the late 80s to 1990s to 71% in the mid-2000s, and then back up to 75% in 2009. This is due to various causes, such as the economic reform that began in 1978, where China switched from a centrally planned to a market-based economy. Since then, male and female employment rates have been falling for all age groups. The United States is home to 329.5 million people with a 60.1% employment to population ratio. Education statistics also suggest that more women go to college than men. The labor force participation statistics reveal that men work more than women, with 69.2% of men compared to 57.4% of women making up the labor force. Labor force participation and average wages of women have been increasing since the 1980s, which has resulted in the gender wage gap narrowing in the United States. The ratio between male and female earnings in the United States has increased from 60% to 79%, meaning there's less income disparity now than there was in, say, the 1980s. Still, gender pay inequality exists. As described in the textbook, earning differences between genders varied by demographic features, with the greatest contrast arising between men and women aged 45 to 54 years, with women earning 74% as much as men in this age range. In 2019, women in the United States earned 89 cents for each dollar made by man. This figure from the textbook New Dimensions of Women's Health illustrates gender pay inequality by age. In 2016, men from each age group earned more than women in the same age group, with the smallest disparity in wages being between men and women ages 16 to 24, and the largest income disparity being between men and women ages 55 to 64. These charts from the International Labor Organization demonstrate the percentage the percent difference of gender wage gap by age compared to the percentage of men and women's participation in the workforce. In each chart, we see that the wage gap generally widens as the age of employees increases. The data also reveals that men tend to participate more in the workforce than women in both China and the United States. In Part 3, we will examine cultural similarities and differences among women in the United States and China. There are various socio-cultural factors that influence the gender pay gap in China, such as education. Women with less education did not obtain the same access to jobs as those who went to college. Experience also constitutes the gender pay gap. Women who had less work experience were paid less, as they were not as qualified as some men for the job. Marital status also impacts the gender wage gap. Some households may rely on one partner to earn income, and it usually is the husband. Furthermore, having a young child can lead to limited access and affordability to childcare, which may result in a woman's inability to work as much. Discrimination is also a struggle among working women in China. Women are likely to be discriminated against in the workforce, denied employment and promotions, and be laid off more quickly, which contributes to their lower employment rate. Culture is another factor that we will look at more closely on the next slide. Culture plays a part in work participation for women. It was once a cultural belief in China that women were equally important to the workforce. Chairman Mao, the founding father of the People's Republic of China, once famously said, "Women hold up half the sky." Mao ran a socialist regime in which the wage gap between men and women was small, but new leadership led to a new market-based economy, as previously mentioned. Before the economy was reformed in 1978, Chinese women were encouraged to work the same exact jobs as men, and work was guaranteed by the state. But after the reform, the ideology of women holding up half the sky became less common, and a patriarchal value system re-emerged, which led to an increase in the number of women withdrawing from the labor market. As seen in China, education, family, marital status, and discrimination impact women in their earnings. And this is true in the United States as well. Women without high school diplomas earned an average of $418 less per week in 2016, about 40% less than women with a diploma. Women with bachelor's degrees earned an extra $975 a week on average, and women with a professional degree earned an average of $1,451 more, about 2.5 to 4 times as much as women without high school diplomas. Women must also balance many tasks to perform while at work, run a household, provide a loving home for their children, spend quality time with their partners, and provide care for their elders. Women account for 70% of unpaid caregivers for the elderly, for instance. Childcare is another issue that working women face. The United States happens to be one of 3 countries in the world that does not offer paid time off for new mothers. 80% of employers reported that childcare problems force employees to lose work time. Gender-based discrimination can also explain some of the wage gap in the United States. In almost every field, men in the same jobs earn more than women with the same education and years of experience. 57% of women do not earn equal pay for equal work. Age contributes to gender pay inequality, as mentioned previously. Race and ethnicity is also at play. The average weekly earnings for white women are 17% higher than those of black women, and 32% higher than those of Hispanic women. The wage gap narrows to 95% for women who have never been married, but rises to 73% among women who are currently married, demonstrating that marital status also plays a part in the gender wage gap. The gender wage gap can be equated to factors such as education, occupational segregation, and work experience. and such is true in the United States. Women often have less work experience than men because men are more likely to work when they have young children and more likely to work longer hours while women stay home with the child. Also, women are twice as likely to work part-time jobs. Women often take part-time work to accommodate other family duties, such as caring for their children or other elderly family members. Even when both men and women hold full-time positions, men are more likely to work longer hours, and such overwork can result in higher pay for men. Furthermore, studies show that women are more likely to have to allocate more of their time to unpaid labor, as mentioned, caring for children, caring for the elderly, etc., as many of these activities have been considered women's work. A study from the Bureau of Labor Statistics records that women worked an average of 10.8 more hours a week doing unpaid household work than men in 2003 to 2007. Being a parent does play an important role in the gender pay gap, as we talked about earlier in the presentation. This table shows estimates of motherhood and fatherhood gaps for China and the United States. The motherhood gaps are estimated by simply comparing the hourly wages of non-mothers to the hourly wages of mothers, while the fatherhood gap compares the hourly wages of non-fathers to the hourly wages of fathers. A positive motherhood or fatherhood gap means that mothers or fathers earn less than non-mothers or non-fathers. In Part 4, we will examine ethical considerations and action taken at individual, local, national, and international levels. The All China Women's Federation was founded in 1949. It's defined as a people's organization that unites women in China and strives for their further emancipation and development. It's considered a people's organization under the leadership of the Communist Party of China. Some goals of the ACWF are as follows: to unite women and mobilize women, to dedicate to reform and opening up in the socialist, economic, political, cultural, social, and ecological drive, to represent women to take part in the management of state, economic, cultural, and social affairs, and to promote the implementation of laws and policies on the protection of women's rights and interests. Though the pay gap still exists in China, certain legislation opposes it. According to Article 48 in the Chinese Constitution, women in the People's Republic of China enjoy equal rights with men in all spheres of life, in political, economic, cultural, social, and family life. The state protects the rights and interests of women, applies the principle of equal pay for equal work to men and women alike. The Law of the People's Republic of China on the Protection of Rights and Interests of Women was established in 1992 to protect women's equal rights and interests in political, economic, cultural, social, and family life. The Employment Promotion Law of 2008 states that employers cannot refuse to employ women or raise recruitment standards for females by using gender as an excuse, except where the types of work or posts are not suitable for women as prescribed by the state. This law also signifies that employers cannot discriminate on the basis of marital or childbearing status. China currently also has a national policy framework for gender equality and women's development known as the China National Program for Women's Development. It seeks to eliminate gender discrimination in employment, promote women's full employment, raise the level of women's employment in urban units, and close the income gap between men and women. China, too, is part of many international conventions aimed at addressing gender inequality, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which include specific gender equality goals as well as wider targets on gender equality and women's economic empowerment. It is also important to note that the gender pay gap in China is undermeasured, as noted by Qi and Li in their research paper future research is needed to examine the determinants of labor force participation and employment for both men and women, and to better understand and identify the causes of the widening gender employment gap. The Equal Rights Advocates Group challenges the legal, policy, and cultural barriers that have allowed the gender wage gap to persist. Some goals of the organization include employers paying women and all people fairly for their work, transparency in pay without retaliation, an end to workplace segregation on the basis of gender and race or ethnicity, elimination of unfair workplace practices that adversely affect low-income women and women of color, fair treatment of pregnant workers and workers with caregiving responsibilities, a local, state, and federal minimum wage that meets the needs of working people and families. The Equal Rights Advocates Group seeks to achieve such goals by means of public mobilization, organizing and strategic communications, policy reform and advocacy, as well as strategic legal enforcement and advocacy. In 1963, the Equal Pay Act was passed in the United States, but it has yet to be updated since then. If no further changes are made, Black women will not earn equal pay until the year 2133, and Latinas will not earn equal pay until 2206. Policymakers are no longer waiting around. State governments are stepping up. For instance, in New York and Colorado, employers must make salary ranges public. And in California, employers with 100 or more employees must report pay data to the Department of Fair Employment. There have been various global efforts to combat gender pay inequality, such as the Stop the Robbery campaign launched by the United Nations Women's Group. As women earn globally 77 cents to every dollar earned by men, they are effectively being robbed. The United Nations also launched the Platform of Champions to call for equal pay for work of equal value internationally. The platform is part of a broader UN International Labor Organization and UN Women Global Equal Pay Coalition and seeks to attain increased support for equal pay by reaching out to policy and decision makers. The International Labor Organization has set various standards to address the gender wage gap, such as the Equal Remuneration Convention, which defines that signatories must promote and ensure equal remuneration for men and women workers for equal value, and the Discrimination, Employment, and Occupation Convention, which states that signatories should promote equal opportunities with respect to employment and eliminate discrimination on the basis of factors such as race, sex, and religion. The Workers with Family Responsibilities Convention sets out that signatories should aim to enable persons with family responsibilities to exercise their right to employment without being subject to discrimination and, to the extent possible, without conflict between their employment and family responsibilities. And the Maternity Protection Convention sets out that signatories should guarantee women the right to return to an equivalent job with equivalent remuneration after maternity leave. They should also ensure that pregnancy and maternity do not constitute a reason for discrimination or the termination of employment. Summary and conclusions. Gender pay inequality is a problem faced by women globally. Women around the world earn about 23 cents less for every dollar earned by men. Lower wages for women lead to negative consequences, such as a greater likelihood for women to be below the poverty line and a greater chance for mood disorders, such as anxiety and depression for women. Many factors contribute to the gender pay gap, such as education, children or child care, cultural beliefs, age, and discrimination based on race or gender. The gender pay gap appears to be widening in China while narrowing in the United States. However, it is still present in many countries across the universe. In order to combat gender pay inequality, action needs to be taken on individual, local, governmental, and international levels. There are so many ways to get involved. We can join campaigns such as the Stop the Robbery movement by the United Nations Women Group, or join with the Equal Rights Advocates Group to help get women the equal pay they deserve. As stated on the Equal Rights Advocates homepage, the wage gap isn't going to close itself. Like is true for many issues faced by women, education is an excellent way to better the quality of life for women. By learning and further researching gender pay inequality, we can understand how this issue still affects women today and what can be done to stop it. Here are my references.